It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
It's the Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson, and today we preview Seahawks and Commanders. Before we do that, Logan, we wanted to kind of take a little bit deeper dive into the biggest talking point, I think, of the week in Commanders land, which is the improved protection for Sam Howell. And it's interesting to hear Howell talk about it yesterday as we record this on a Thursday. He talked about it Wednesday morning, and then Ron was asked about it and talked about it Wednesday afternoon at his press conference. And everyone seems to think that the offensive line got better because the debate / commentary around sacks is the offensive line stinks or is good. And the reality is that it is much more global. There is a lot of factors going into this. So when you think about play calling, Sam's ability to get rid of the football and move in the pocket, the offensive line, anything else that goes into it, what are you actually seeing on tape that is causing this sack number to come down?
Yeah, well, since the New York Giants game, I think everything has gotten better with regards to the protection. Obviously, I think the main thing that I would kind of point to is there's been a huge kind of emphasis in terms of we're going to do more quick game. And that to me is maybe the most significant factor of everything. Everyone wants to say, oh, it's Sam, it's Larson, it's Chris Paul. It's just the play calling is more advantageous to promote positive pass pro. And what I mean by that is when you go back and watch the first drives of these games, there's sequences, because I chart quick game versus play pass versus 5-step drop. There's sequences where it's 6 consecutive quick game, married with runs and screens, and they never really push the football down the field until they find that opportunity where they can do that. And I think that's something that people really undervalue when it comes to offensive line play and production. And one of the things that I think was really tough early in the season is you had this very effective pass game that lived in 5-step drops. And, I do some consulting with pass rushers around the league. And one of the things that I really emphasize is you are hunting and looking for the 5-step drop. That's where you're going to get your production. That's where you're going to get your opportunity to get a sack. Because if you compare it even to, Mac Jones last week with New England, our rush couldn't really get going. But a big reason was because a huge point of emphasis for them was we're going to run a ton of quick game, we're going to run a ton of screens, and we're going to be very selective about when we push the ball down the field. And I think when you have an offensive line that is, not the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, so there's 31 other teams that are having this issue, you got to be very good about play calling. And I think one of the things that fans were frustrated when Chase and Montez were here is they're like, the defensive line isn't productive. They're not creating the pressure numbers or the sack numbers. But when every single team that played us understood where kind of the horses were on the defense, and the offensive coordinators for the other teams called games that limited rush opportunities. And I think that's been one of the most meaningful factor in my perspective, is that EB's just done a better job of not letting defensive linemen get in a rhythm and tee off. And the other things are important. They are relevant. Like Sam's, I think, playing better. I think he understands how to manage pressures a little bit better. Obviously, like we talked about on the podcast earlier in the week, I think he can still grow in that area, but there has been growth. He understands where the ball should go. All those things are important, but I think it's the play calling that I would say that's the thing that is probably most affecting this sack number.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And on a baseline number, before you even get into any chess level football analysis, the checkers level is math. It's opportunities, right? Yeah. If the percentages stay the exact same, and let's say I don't think they have. I think they've come down because of those other factors that we talked about. But even if they were to stay the exact same in terms of pressure to sack, if you're dropping back 50 times a game versus 30, that's going to result in way less sacks. And so on a sheer opportunity basis, EB has reduced the number with play calls of opportunities for Sam Howell to get sacked. You add in the fact that has a second level, impact, if you will, a second layer to it, that it breaks the rhythm of those pass rushers, that they can't feel like they're just learning how the tackle is setting. They're setting the same way pretty much every time because it's a 5-step drop. They're understanding where we can get away with certain things. We know we have time to run a stunt or a game, which is something the Commanders have struggled with, because it's going to be 5-step drop, and we're not going to pull ourselves out of a run lane. We're not going to pull ourselves out of pursuit of a quick game. We can do things as a pass rush unit that exposes an offensive line and exposes a quarterback. And those have been, I don't want to say eliminated, but largely reduced, like to normal levels. So you can't eliminate them always. There's certain time score situations. Plus, the benefits and the upsides of drop back passing are worth it, as long as you don't enhance the negatives and the downsides. And so I think that the play calling is absolutely the biggest factor, which is, it's just funny that that's happened with the same, or at the same time that you have two new offensive linemen. And thus everyone is like, oh, it's definitely the two new offensive linemen. That's the thing that changed. And it's like, well, it is, but it's not the only thing that changed. And if we're really looking at it, it's not the biggest factor.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the New York Giants game, I think that's going to be kind of a key point this year for this offense, is that they realized things had to change. And I think they did a pretty good job of overhauling it. And again, I think EB was kind of on the fringe of something from a play calling standpoint in that game, but obviously
the second half was way different than the first in that game.
Yeah, and the execution just wasn't there, And I think when they get into the last two games, the game against Philly, the game against New England, obviously New England is a defense lacking high level talent. The Philadelphia Eagles are a team that is very simple in terms of what they present to you, so good opportunities in both cases to kind of get right. But I think that EB's found kind of a play calling rhythm. We mentioned the fullback the other day, like getting into different personnel groupings, presenting different looks, presenting different formations. All that stuff just gives the defense more stuff to think about, more stuff to process. And I think you mentioned the quick game stuff. When you are rushing on a 3-step drop, it's almost impossible to generate any type of meaningful pressure from the defensive line. So if we can get in those situations and I can maximize those and find easy throws for Sam, that's awesome. And you mentioned the two offensive linemen. I don't want to make it sound like that they're playing poorly or anything like that. It just, sure. I don't think
they're just not playing significantly better than the Correct. Guys they replace.
Yeah. I think there is, people want to give Tyler Larsen credit. And I think there may be, this is something you'd have to talk with Tyler about and talk with the staff about, because the sack numbers come way down. I think Tyler does a pretty good job, or they've done a better job of identifying fronts and protections and things like that. Is that entirely Tyler, or is Sam taking more responsibility in that? Like, where do you assign credit in that situation? But what we can say is that it's improved over the last couple of weeks. So I think there's a lot of positive things coming out of this, but I think the catalyst for it all, and I think this is pretty non-negotiable in my opinion, is the play calling is more diverse, and that diverse play calling is giving these guys an opportunity to kind of settle in and do some different stuff. So
yeah, no, definitely. I will say this about the offensive line. I think the thing that got misconstrued about what we and others who were trying to be like, no, it's not the offensive line, we're saying is, it wasn't that the offensive line was perfect, obviously, but it was also like the quality of the non-bad snaps. It wasn't like they were giving up pressures all the time. It's not like they were losing all the time in the run game or in pass pro. Like there wasn't a constant, amount of pressure on Sam. There were some bad quick losses, and some of those were the sacks. And so it felt a lot worse than it was. But if you're going to play 65 snaps and 55 of them are good and you have 10 bad snaps, like that's not great, but it's very different than if in those 10 snaps you give up 6 sacks, then you maybe give up 3 sacks in 65 snaps, but 25 of them are actually bad because there's pressures. There's, you got to scramble and throw the ball away. Like there was generally pretty good play on the plays that weren't really bad, and those numbers were in a good place in terms of the skew. And I think what has happened from the offensive line standpoint with Chris Paul, with Tyler Larsen, is some of the really bad stuff that did slip through has gotten cleaned up a little bit. So there's an extra 3 to 5 snaps a game, let's say, where Nick Gates or Sadiq Charles might have lost quickly, whether it's physical or mental mistake, that Chris Paul and Tyler Larsen are doing a little bit better job. And those half-second margins of even don't lose as quickly do make a difference in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think, in the Philly game, for example, like Chris and Charles weren't on the same page all the time. And there was opportunities for pressure that you never see because Sam gets the ball out of his hand, right? Like, I think that's the other thing, that it's Sam understands kind of his role in the pass protection, I think, a little bit more. And it's not perfect, but it's getting better. And I think the thing that I go back to all the time is, like, when you look at offensive line play around the league, what the Commanders' offensive line was doing outside of the New York Giants game. And I know you can't take away games because that game happened, but it's average And I know fans don't want to hear that. I think because there's this expectation that, like Trent Williams was here, Brandon Sheriff, these awesome kind of monoliths of offensive line play were here for a long time. And that's the standard for the position. But when you look at the rest of the league, most of the offensive line is average. And I think that they were safely in that bucket and probably trending to the positive side. And I think you're getting to see now that positive line play that we were kind of trying to identify and allude to earlier in the season because of the play calling, because Sam's doing better. And I do think, Larson's doing a good job and Chris Paul's doing a good job. And I think there is something there with kind of the bigger bodies creating a deeper pocket for him to kind of see throws a little bit more effectively. I think there is something there. We'd have to go back and do more of a longitudinal look at the last couple of games or whatever. But I think there's something there. But to me, it's this is what this group was. And are they going to still give up quick pressure? Yeah, they are. But can Sam get the ball out of his hand quickly? Yes. Why is he doing that? Because we're running more quick game. Because we're not letting the defense get in a rhythm and attack us. We're staying out of third and long situations a little bit more effectively. All those things are contributing to this, and I think that's something that there is a level of nuance and gray here that I think fans need to understand. And I think that I think we're trying to pin that down for them.
Yeah, and I will say this though: what it doesn't mean is that that actually the O-line is perfectly fine moving forward for
Correct.
The rest of the time Sam here. Like, they can get better and they should get better. Because I think what you see in Philadelphia, for instance, is a quarterback in Jalen Hurts who, with elite offensive line play in front of him, can play at a ridiculously high level. And if you give that to Sam, like, I think he is also capable of playing at a really high level. Like, if you can eliminate the thing that makes him or that is his biggest weakness, like, without having to coach it out of him, just because you protect him with an elite O-line, that seems like a very good roster building strategy. And especially with the money and the picks that you're going to have, assuming that Sam is your guy moving forward, because of specifically over the next couple of years where he's on this rookie contract, like, you have the ability to do that. You have the ability to go spend big money in free agency on whether it's a guard, whether it's tackle, whether it's both, and then also drafting someone high in April to fill out that line. So, like, they should invest in the O-line and take it from pretty average to really good, or maybe even great. That is something that I would certainly endorse, and I think you're with me in terms of roster building. But for now, understanding where they are in the current moment, I think that's how the breakdown goes, if you will.
Yeah, a lot of teams have to kind of deal with like average. I think Minnesota is a great example. And, Minnesota, like, I think that is a perfect example of what we're talking about. The offensive line on paper is pretty average, right? Kirk did a great job of elevating that group week in and week out, getting the ball out of his hand quickly. And so because you have all this money invested in Kirk Cousins from a contract standpoint, you can't invest it in the offensive line. And so you kind of like take your lumps there, and the quarterback has to elevate that group. But in this situation, like you're talking about, and like it was with Jalen Hurts when he first got in the league, on his rookie deal, you can make some investments along the offensive line that you wouldn't be able to make otherwise. And that can elevate a young player for a couple of years. And so I do think there is a lot of merit to this idea. Like, if you could get this offensive line, 30% better this offseason, then I look at Sam and I say he's actually very similar to Jalen Hurts, because Jalen Hurts holds the heck out of the football. It doesn't show up as a sack statistic because that offensive line's so good. And I think that's a really interesting comparison. So, kind of in a perfect world, like, imagine if he's playing behind the Philadelphia offensive line, we're probably not even having this conversation. We don't even know this is an issue for Sam in terms of, a high pressure to sack ratio. But I think, this is good for him. I think this is good for him to learn how to develop his pocket awareness, his understanding of where the ball needs to be, his rhythm and timing in the NFL. Because if he can elevate this group, then that money can go elsewhere. It can go to the defense. It can go other places on the roster. I do agree. I think they will make an investment there at some point this offseason. But I think this is good offensive production with a solid group of offensive linemen that are overperforming a little bit. So I think that's coaching. I think all those things go into it. But to your point, it would be nice, if you had like a wall in front of them you felt pretty good about. But this is pretty common for most teams in the NFL.
Yeah, and you look at, that's the way, not saying that Sam's going to be Drew Brees, but that is the way Brees did it for all those years in New Orleans. He had studs in front of him, and they knew that that's what they needed. And if they did that, then Drew Brees could be Drew Brees. And so I think that's, again, solid roster building. Hopefully that's something the Commanders are doing this offseason, presuming that Sam does enough over the next 8 games, which are a heck of a test, starting with Seattle this weekend, to prove that he is the starting quarterback for the future for this team. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulson there. We will be at Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor on Sunday to preview this game for 3 hours. We'll also keep you updated on all things going on around the league in the 1 o'clock window as well. So you can come hang out with us, Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor, for the Take Command pregame show. And of course, you can listen all 3 hours on 106.7 The Fan, the Team 980. Watch it on YouTube. So we just talked about the pass protection, Logan. How does it hold up against this Seattle defense? We're going to find out. They've got a lot of talent. What do you see when you watch them on tape?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of defensive front, looking to start there because we're just talking about the offensive line. Boye Mafe, the second-round pick last year out of Minnesota, has been kind of their guy. He's had a sack in the last 6 games, which is a pretty cool record, I think, that shows a little bit of consistency. He probably should have had a couple more against Baltimore, but Lamar Jackson did Lamar Jackson stuff and got out of some stuff. He's kind of their guy. I think the other guys on that defensive line are fine, but there's nobody that jumps out to you as being dominant. I think, what's the other defensive end's name? If you could look that up, I got it right here on my phone. But they're talented athletes that I think are dynamic in terms of pass rush, but they haven't been that productive, and I think there's some issues there.
Talking about Darrell Taylor.
Darrell Taylor, thank you. And so I think that's one of the reasons you go out and you trade for Leonard Williams, is to add a little bit of juice to your pass rush. So when you look at how they've got it listed on the depth chart, how they played last week, they've got Boye Mafe on the offensive left, and they've got Leonard Williams, who plays basically in this 3-4 structure they run. He plays the right defensive end. So Chris Paul and Charles Leno going to have to earn your paycheck this week. And, obviously Taylor, I think, is the other guy on the other side, is a good athlete and a good pass rusher. Remember, I kind of made that distinction. We were talking about Montez and Chase a couple weeks ago. He's not the best defensive end, but he's a good pass rusher. They've got a couple guys like that with some decent pass rush juice. It's just about, can they turn that juice into production consistently? So it's a group that I feel very comfortable with. Maffe's the guy that's been very consistent for them, so you got to kind of star him. Leonard Williams, obviously a good football player, but it's not overly dynamic. They're good. It's a good D-line, but it's not amazing. I think the thing that really, where they get a lot of miles out of, is they do a really good job with their 5-man pressures, and they don't do them all the time. They kind of run this Seattle cover 3, cover 2. They play a little bit of man. That's kind of been an evolution of the system up there, but a pretty conservative coverage structure. And they are pretty selective about when they bring 5-man pressure. So they're bringing a nickel. Jamal Adams is a guy they blitz quite a bit. They bring a linebacker occasionally, but they do a really, really good job about turning those 5-man pressures into actual pressures and sacks. And I went and watched all of their takeaway cut-ups yesterday. So they have 14 takeaways. I think they're 10th in the NFL in takeaways, or 9th in the NFL in takeaways. So they do turn the football over quite a bit. And what you find is a lot of those come off of those 5-man pressures. They just run them really, really effectively. And it's not like they're doing anything crazy. You can just tell they have a very simple defense, very straightforward defense. And one of the things that allows you to do is be really, really good at what you do. And that's what they are. They're really good in those 5-man pressure situations about, hey, I'm not rushing this guy right down the middle. I'm attacking his inside shoulder. So the guard can't push through to this blitzer. The blitzer's going to be free to the quarterback. The quarterback, makes an errant throw. They get an interception, because in the back end, Tyreek Woolen's not playing as well as he was last year, but still a dynamic football player, converted receiver, can catch the football. Obviously, the kid from Illinois, his name is
Devin Witherspoon.
Witherspoon is balling right now. Trey Brown, I think, is the other corner. He's got 2 interceptions. He's doing a great job. So they do have guys in the back end that can hurt you. So I think it's just about, and they've been very effective as a defense outside of the Baltimore game, which I think is probably more on the offense. If I were going to assign any kind of blame here, I think the offense turned the ball over 4 times, 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles, if I remember correctly. But they've been very consistent. So I think this defense, while simple, is pretty good, and they're well coached, and that's something that they weren't last year. And I think that's a nice thing to see up in Seattle, kind of hearkening back to what they were, when I was playing, kind of the Legion of Boom type stuff. So.
Yeah, obviously some of the simpler coverage structures Sam has done better against this year. We can talk about that in a second. I just had a flashback though when you said Jamal Adams' name, and I was like, oh God, that's right, he's there. The last time Washington played Jamal Adams was 2019, and he was a terror.
Like, was he?
Three sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Like, he was everywhere. It was one of his last games with the Jets, I think, before he got traded. But yeah, oh my God, peak Jamal Adams was something else. There's a reason Seattle traded 2 first-round picks for him. It hasn't really worked out for them.
That's crazy
because obviously he's been hurt a ton, but back healthy, and he's not what he used to be, but still a good football player. Condra Diggs is also very good. So they've got a ton of talent in that back end, which is obviously scary. Like, to me, the thing that I look at their depth chart and I'm like, God, they got speed everywhere.
Yeah.
We'll see if Jordan Brooks plays at inside linebacker. He's banged up, but if not, like,
he's been good
they got Devin Bush behind him. Like, and again, like, Devin Bush hasn't been what I think he was expected to be coming out in the draft. Otherwise, he'd still be, what was it, Pittsburgh, where he started. And would, everyone's like, oh my God, he's gonna be the next great Steelers linebacker, and he's not. But like, the team speed they have is, I think, going to be interesting to watch that matchup, and watching, can Sam adjust to from a New England team that lacked that, it didn't have like
that's a great point.
Insane athletes all over the field, to a team that's plays pretty simple structures, but it's going to have guys everywhere.
And what you see is, with that team speed that you're alluding to, is that the windows, even though you can kind of identify those coverage structures, excuse me, is there's small windows because guys are ripping in the football. And I think, and they do enough variation. They play enough cover 3. They mix in enough cover 2. They mix in enough man, where if you're not really dotting your I's and crossing your T's, you'll throw them the ball because you think it's a different coverage than it is, and you'll get an interception. And it's not like they don't live in that the same way that New England does, with regards to like, hey, we're trying to be varied. We're trying to be, this exotic coverage structure, exotic blitzes. They don't do that, but it's just kind of enough of a changeup, kind of like we were talking about with the pass rush stuff earlier. It's enough of a changeup that it keeps you on your toes offensively. So I think this is going to be a really interesting matchup. I think Sam should do fine with it. I think the offense should do fine with it in general, but I think the thing that you kind of circle with a red pen is like, how do these corners match up with our receivers and our playmakers? Because like you said, they are pretty dynamic playmakers. And like I said, Tyreek is not playing as well as he was last year, but he still he's 6'4" and he runs a 4.3 40, and it shows up on film, and he's kind of all over the field in that regard. So, can you take advantage of that? Can you take advantage of of Trey Brown? And a lot of teams have tried, but have not been very successful. So outside of Baltimore, where they absolutely took him behind the woodshed, but that was more of them running the football. And that was kind of their Achilles heel last year, was they were bad against the run. And prior to the Baltimore game, they were pretty good. They were a pretty good defense, like a top 12 defense. So I think it'll be a very, very interesting challenge, very unique in terms of what they're going to be seeing from an athlete standpoint, for sure.
So we play predict a game plan here. Put you as EB. How do you attack them? Do you try to repeat some of what Baltimore did and run it, or you just go like, that's what Baltimore does, it's not what we do? We gotta try to find ways to create good matchups, give Sam easy looks, and get the ball out of his hands.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to do. And it's crazy because when you look at, like, they played Cincinnati, and I know Joe Burrow wasn't right, but I think that game was 17-13. Cincinnati won, but it was kind of a slugfest. They've held a lot of teams to not a lot of points. Arizona to 10. They had another game in there where it was 13, like very low scoring affairs. And the offense for Seattle has been turning the football over quite a bit. So I think this is a good defense. It's just about kind of finding what you're looking for. And I think I would I don't want to say cut and reuse what I used against Philly, but it's going to be very similar to that. You're going to kind of know what they're in. Can you take advantage of it? Can you throw the quick game? Can you throw the screens? Can you get Sam settled in? Can you get the crowd to quiet down a little bit?
I want to talk about the crowd for sure in a second. Yeah,
that's going to be a huge thing for them. So if I'm doing a game plan, I say, what's been effective for them? It's been the quick game, screens, selective about your shot plays, and giving Sam some autonomy at the line of scrimmage. And I think that's what you're going to see. And I think Tyler Larson in this game has to be excellent because you're dealing with all this crowd noise. And like I said, they don't blitz a ton, but they're good at the 5-man pressures. So can we help Sam identify those 5-man pressures? Because we have 5 offensive linemen, we should be able to pick it up. Let's make sure we get them targeted correctly.
So that brings us to the crowd noise, because they've done a great job of giving Sam this autonomy at the line of scrimmage. He's able to do, hand signal this, but it's also yell that and rip, Liz, whatever these line calls are week to week. And now you can't say anything because in Seattle, it is probably the loudest stadium in the NFL. It's just a cool design. This stadium, for those that don't know, is like a genuine feat of engineering. It's 50,000. It's not like it's 100,000 people in there like Dallas is or some of these other stadiums that are monstrous.
It's a cool stadium.
But it's 50,000, and the way they designed it is there's like overhangs over the stands on either side. It's open on one end where like the 12th man flag is. I think everyone's seen that. But the way the sound from the stands, like the angle of the actual stands were built at and where those awnings are over top, the sound bounces like this and it all triangulates down onto the field. And so it's super loud, very specifically onto the field. And everybody in Seattle knows it, and they get really loud on third down, and they're smart fans. They get really loud when you're in the huddle. Like I remember Cooley used to talk about this when I was working with him at 980 way back when. He's like, some fans are smart fans and some fans are dumb fans. And the dumb fans will let the play call happen in the huddle. And then as the team walks in the line of scrimmage, it's like, all right, get loud for your defense. And it's like, cool, we already did the communication part. Thanks for playing. Now you're just getting me like amped up for the play. Now, Seattle, it will be loud all the way through. You're going to have to yell in the huddle. You're going to have to be really, really crystal clear with your communication. Like Sam is going to be hoarse at the post-game press conference for sure. And the ability to make adjustments to the line of scrimmage, nevertheless, snap the football and have an actual snap count is going to be severely limited as long as this is a close game and the crowd's into it. So how do you combat that, especially with a young quarterback who has probably never faced something? I mean, Denver's crowd is pretty good, but I don't think he's faced something quite like this as a pro.
Yeah, he's played pretty big-time college football, so he's had some exposure to it, but obviously NFL
You play at Clemson, like it's loud as hell, but
loud.
It's different. It's different in college.
There's something about that stadium, man, and I think you alluded to it with the engineering, but like you'll be on the field. I'll be right next to the offensive lineman, and I cannot hear what he's saying. And I think that's something that it sounds crazy, but we're 2 feet from each other, and I have to like turn and look at him while he's making the call to make sure that I get the correct call. I understand where the run's going. It's not like usually you get to the line of scrimmage and the center will be like, hey, we're going 51, and then I go, oh, okay, well, we're going to triple to 58 or whatever. But now I got to look, I got to physically see his point. And that's the other thing, like they shift around a lot. Not Seattle doesn't, but if they do move around a little bit, it affects the targets, it affects the runs. So it is going to be challenging. I remember we didn't do this in Seattle, but Kirk was always really good about getting in the huddle and like kneeling down and like sitting on his haunches kind of, and like barking the play up into the huddle. And it really made it easier to hear it as opposed to a lot of quarterbacks who kind of stand in and then talk down. Because when I was, I forget where I was, but I actually had to, the quarterback wouldn't do that. I think it was Jay Cutler. And I actually had to like get on my hands and knees so I could see his mouth because he was just kind of talking to the ground. But those are the types of things that matter here, right? It seems ridiculous, but it's how, because so much of what you do offensively is communication. So can I get the play? Do I understand what I'm doing? And so for Sam to understand, like, how's he going to deliver the play in the huddle? How loud does he have to be? Does the offensive line, like, that was another thing Kirk was excellent at. He'd be in the huddle and be like, look at the offensive line, yell the 2-jet, yell the pass concept to the receiver, point to the Z if the Z was tagged. Like he was really good at doing that. And Matt Ryan was excellent at it too. And Deshaun Watson was excellent at it. Like the top flight quarterbacks that I played with were excellent at that stuff. And so for Sam, I haven't had to do that really. Can I learn how to do that? You mentioned Denver's a good stadium, but it's going to be different. Then at the line of scrimmage, that gets crazy. If you're not really dialed in, if your team isn't dialed in, that can be really, really challenging. And they've added a little bit more of that. And I think it's really helped them. So like, it's not just Sam, but it's the whole offense being aware of the situation. And I know this sounds like to a lot of people, like maybe it's overkill, but that's how you have to operate in these crazy loud environments. like in the dome, when in Minnesota's new stadium, it gets loud like that. I have to really think about it. I have to look at the ball to get snapped. I have to kind of periff the quarterback. If he comes to line of scrimmage, I have to get up and look at it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And you have to signal the routes. Like, you can't just spark them out anymore. You got to signal what you're doing. So it is a comprehensive thing. And I remember when I was in Atlanta, this is something we used to do. Matt Ryan used to whisper the play. We wouldn't have any crowd noise, but he'd get to line of scrimmage. He'd be like, all right. He'd be like, hey, twins right. You know, and it was like, and you have to really, and he'd whisper his cadence and he'd whisper the check, and you had to just be really dialed in. And I think if you have a methodology for that in the week, it's very, very helpful. And so some teams will bring out the speakers, but the one thing I respect about Matt Ryan a lot is that he was thinking about it for every walkthrough. We would be in like sneakers in the gym, and he would be whispering his cadence. He'd be whispering the play so that we'd get used to not being able to hear it, and we'd have to develop our own way of hearing it. And I don't think Sam's going to do that because he's a young guy. But are the coaches going to help him kind of develop that process? Would be interesting.
Yeah, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be a little later in the week, but we can cut up the clip and send it to EB and be like, "Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think about the whisper practice?"
It was
okay.
I remember the first time we had an away game when I was in Atlanta, and I was like, he's like legit whispering the cadence. Like, I can't, and I was like, this is really smart. But all the guys that had been there, it was like old hat. They had their way of like hearing it and stuff. So it was interesting.
Smart. It's really, really smart.
Very smart.
Why did Matt Ryan play 18 years and win an MVP and probably go into the Hall of Fame? That's why, because he thinks about the game in that level of detail. If you reread stories about like Peyton Manning, same type of stuff. They always have a way. But I think it's just to kind of wrap up this point and wrap up the thoughts on the offense. Like, part of the success of the last couple of weeks is they've been in good looks. They've been in good plays. They've gotten themselves out of bad plays. And they've taken advantage of certain things where it's like, oh yeah, we got them. Okay, let's get into that play that, for this formation or this, this coverage, this front, this alignment. And if you can't have that communication, you're stuck in bad plays. And that's obviously not a great way to operate offensively. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. All right, time for the Commanders defense and what it can do against the Seahawks offense. Of course, we'll be talking about all of it after the game and see how it went. Here's the preview. That'll be the post view, if you will, on YouTube, probably around 9 o'clock-ish, about 90 minutes after the game ends. It'll be a late one on Sunday with the 4:25 kickoff, but we'll be on YouTube for the instant reaction show. Of course, that pod will also be in your audio feeds Monday morning. But if you subscribe right now, especially if you're watching this right now on 106.7 The Fans YouTube page, the subscribe button, it's literally right there. Just go ahead and click it. You get a little alert saying that we're live, and you can come watch us when we record that / live stream it on Sunday night. But the Commanders defense, I think this is going to be a fun week for them in terms of a challenge. Like, you've got a high variance type of offense. Before we started recording this, Logan, I was watching our guy Colt McCoy's show Scheme.
Yep.
Shane Waldron does a phenomenal job as the OC. They give Geno a lot of information pre-snap. They use a lot of motion. They've got some funky formations. What do you like about this offense when you see it on tape, and how do you think the Commanders match up with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it falls in the, obviously Shane Waldron is a guy that is very much a part of the Shanahan tree. He comes from by way of Sean McVay. And so there's a lot of crossover there. Like, their keeper game, their boot game is very strong. They run the outside zone very well. They utilize play action quite a bit. And I think they do a really good job finding explosive plays. I don't remember the exact statistic, but I think they're 8th in explosive passes. They're 10th in explosive runs in the NFL, and they don't have a lot of play volume, which is another reason. Like, so they're even though they're 10th or they're 8th, in explosive passes, their percentage is much, much higher. And I think the thing that sticks out to me is, like, they do a lot of good stuff and they find these explosive plays and they find these explosive opportunities, but they're a disaster on third down. I think they're the 29th team in the NFL in terms of third down percentage. They're like 31.7%, something crazy like that. So they do it unless they get an explosive play, the offense kind of withers. And so I think Shane and the offense there, they do a great job of finding ways to get their explosive playmakers touches. And there's a lot of them, man. DK, obviously, I'm a little surprised at how they're utilizing him at the moment. They're kind of very vertical based route tree. A couple of years ago, he was having a lot of success kind of with crossing routes, kind of that mid to deep level crosser where you're like in that 15-yard range where you catch the ball moving and you just take it for touchdowns. Not so much of that anymore. Tyler Lockett is, to me, one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL. Jackson Smith and Jigba is the first-round pick out of Ohio State, and you see his smoothness, his athleticism. Jake Bobo is a guy they undrafted free agent out of UCLA who's been very productive for them at points this year. So they have these explosive playmakers. Then they have the running backs too, are outstanding football players. Walker the third, awesome. Zach Charbonnet from UCLA. The tight end Noah Fant is I think he's a 4.4 guy coming out of Iowa. So they have all these explosive playmakers at every position. And they do a good job of getting them the football. And those guys do great stuff after the catch. And that gives me probably the biggest level of consternation is I don't really give a damn how you are on third down if you're good at finding explosive plays, because this team, the Commanders, have had a hard time stopping explosive plays. Through like some of those plays that you saw last week against New England were fine. But this week, with these explosive playmakers, they will not be fine. And that'll be 21 points. And so the score will be 28 or 30 just off of those 5 explosive plays that New England missed and that this team will hit. So I think the one level of solace that I do take in watching them is their offensive line is extremely banged up. They're on Stone Forsythe is their swing tackle. He's been starting the last couple of games. He's hurt. He's banged up. He's been playing. But he's their swing guy. He's like their Cornelius Lucas. So he probably shouldn't be starting. Cross has had a regression from last year in terms of pass protection efficiency. I think they're banged up at the guard spots. They've kind of had 3 or 4 guys playing in there. They've played fine. But again, when you're getting young guys, rookies in there, guys with very limited playing experience, they're good football players, but they're obviously not on the same page with a lot of stuff. Watching the Cincinnati game, they did a great job, the Seattle offense, of getting down into the red zone, and then they'd give up 2 sacks, and then they'd have to kick a field goal. They probably should have won that game based on red zone trips, but they just gave up a ton of sacks, and they weren't very efficient in the red zone. So I think that's kind of what you see with them. They've got this tremendous firepower. They're a powder keg of an offense, but because of some of the protection issues, because of the inefficiency on third down, which is weird to me because you've got good third down players. So I think that's more of a scheme thing. It'd be interesting to talk to Colt about that after he did his breakdown. But that to me is the difference. Is they're not good at sustaining drives, but they are good at finding big chunk plays. And the other thing that's incredibly important in terms of this analysis is Geno Smith has been turning the football over at a much higher rate than he was last year. So like you look at the Baltimore game, for example, or look at any game this year, really, in the last probably 4 games, they should have won decisively, but he's throwing 2 picks. He's got a fumble. He's got a fumble and that they lose and an interception in the red zone. And that's something that, again, in addition to the third down inefficiency, if you can maximize those turnovers, when he throws you the football, catch that son of a gun, because they've let teams stay in games that had no business being in games. Arizona being a prime example.
Yeah. Geno on the year, 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, which is kind of crazy because Sam's got 9, but I guess the Buffalo game really yaks that up.
Well, how many fumbles? He also has a ton of fumbles too.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that number right now.
That's a hard number to find just on the old Google machine, because Google goes, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, it says he's only got 1 and he's lost it, but
he had 2 against Baltimore.
Right, so I don't know maybe that's as a runner.
Because it'd be like a sack fumble thing. I gotcha.
Yeah, I don't have a fumble stat on ESPN.com that I can easily find. So, and I know that number's not right, the 1, but yeah. Point is, you got to take advantage when there's opportunities because they will give it to you. And I think you also just can't fall asleep. You can't be like, oh, we're killing it because you get off the field on third down for 4 drives in a row. They stink on third down. They're the 3rd worst team in the league. It's less than 32%. It's like 31.7%. Yeah. It's awful on third down. But that doesn't mean that on the next 1st or 2nd down, they're not going to hit you for a 70-yarder. And Tyler Lockett's been doing that forever. And one of the matchups that I think is really intriguing is like, if I'm Seattle, I see what A.J. Brown did to Forbes, and I'm like, how do I get him on the field? How do I get DK matched up on him? And I'm going to let DK big body him because I don't think that the kid can stop him. And Forbes was awesome last week, but he's doing it against like Tyquan Thornton. Tyquan Thornton, all due respect, is not DK Metcalf. And so I think if I'm Jack, like I got to figure out how I'm going to prevent some of the bad matchups. And whether that's, hey, BSJ, like, I know you're not the biggest dude in the world, girth wise, like BSJ's tall, which is helpful, but like, you're going to shadow DK. And it felt like they did that a little bit last week. Like they moved BSJ around quite a bit last week.
Yeah, they definitely he draws a tough man. Every week he draws the best receiver, which is tough, man. He's like, that's in the slot, that's outside. But yeah, man, he's got a, I don't want to be him if I'm being honest, because he has tough coverage matchups for sure.
He does, but like, someone's got to do it, and
right.
He's probably their best. I mean, Kendall, like, could you put Kendall on DK? Maybe,
so
and maybe
that'd be something I
was
talking about with Fred. Like, who do you want where? And obviously Fred was like, I want St. Juste on Metcalf, but Tana was like, I'd prefer Kendall, because Kendall's got a good feel for kind of route depths, and DK, when you watch him, obviously is a freak, but he's not the most nuanced route runner. He's kind of like AJ Brown in that way. He's a little stiff, doesn't separate great. And so let Kendall kind of match that up, use his brain to kind of position and get. Then the problem is who's going to match up with Lockett, because Lockett is kind of the opposite. He's an excellent route runner, great short area quickness, and I
actually think Forbes kind of like, my concern with Forbes is the bigger receiver. And if you're going to throw balls deep, like, obviously, can Forbes bite on a double move? For sure. And that route running savvy, there's a risk there. But his makeup speed and like, if you're going to high point the football and make a play on it, Tyler Lockett's not the biggest dude.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And then I think the other one is like Jackson Smith and Jigba, because, like, who do you put on him? Like, do you put Danny Johnson in and let St. Juste play outside? Is this, is he the nickel this week and Forbes doesn't play that much? Or is it Forbes on Lockett? And then the problem is, does BFJ need to play the slot? And I think you'd kind of be wasting him there in terms of matchup. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that.
I mean, that's what they did last week, though. Like, BSJ was in the slot decent amount.
A lot. Well, that way their best receiver was in the slot, against what was his, Douglas or whatever his name was.
Yeah.
Number 81. So I think, but to your point, like, their best, I think Jackson Smith and Jig was a good player, but to me, their best receivers are outside. So I'm going to put I want St. Juste on one of those guys. And does that mean, and Fuller's going to be on the field. So who plays the slot? Is it Danny Johnson? He's the backup nickel. That's kind of what I'm saying is, how do you allocate those resources? And if you think Fuller can do it, are you okay with putting BSJ on Jackson Smith and Jigba, a guy that is, to me, like their third option?
Right. I think that's a great question, and a interesting thing that Jackson have to figure out. But also, to me, like, let's say they go with that route, I would be like, Emmanuel, even when it's zone, you line up over Lockett. Like, because I don't want those cover 3 situations where you wind up essentially in man coverage one-on-one down the field on DK Metcalf. Like, because that's been the problem, right? Like, if Emmanuel's playing on the right side, you just put DK over there in a situation where you think they're going to play cover 3, and it turns into man-to-man out there, like on a vertical route. And that's been some of the issues. It's like, sometimes it's cover 1 and it truly is man-to-man, but sometimes, like, it's a cover 3 look and you're just screwed. So, like, how do you make sure that you genuinely keep Forbes away from DK? Or do you just say, like, it's the NFL, we're going to have to live with this and hope for better results this time? He played great last week. Maybe his confidence is better. If it was me, I would find ways to because I don't want to just play a bunch of man coverage. Like, that's obviously one way around it, is to be like, yeah, we'll man up and just everybody follow their guy wherever they go. But I don't think this team is well suited for that. So I would find ways to make sure that Forbes is not dealing with DK literally as often as possible.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's going to be interesting is, how do you handle the big nickel situation? And this is obviously. Khaleke Hudson's been playing a little bit of the big nickel, and it's allowed Cam to play a little bit more of the post. But this week with Noah Fant, do you want him down the box? And who are you too young? Then you have the 2 young safeties back there. There's a lot of stuff that this offense presents in terms of stopping, in terms of personnel. And I think, to your point, like, if I'm Jack, I'm trying to go a little bit more conservative here from a coverage structure standpoint. I really want them to try and drive the length of the field, because they've shown that they just are not consistent enough at that to do it. I don't care if that percentage jumps up a little bit, if they're in that 40% range, but what I really don't want is explosive plays. And it's one of our favorite statistics, but we get those explosive plays, the likelihood of scoring goes from 5% to 55% or whatever it is. So that's kind of how they've lived through the first couple of weeks of the NFL season. So I'm going to be like, hey, let's get like deep cover 2. And then the problem there is, you don't have Cody Barton anymore, who's been pretty good as a Tampa 2 player in terms of feeling out where to match and how to do stuff. So do you feel comfortable with Jamin doing that?
You're also lighter in the box. Like, because
Yeah.
that's the other solution is like, okay, well, how do you eliminate the cover 3 situations? You don't play cover 3. You play a bunch of cover 2. Okay, well, then you got a too high look and the box is a little bit lighter every snap.
Yeah.
So that's not exactly ideal either.
It's tough. And I think, like, to your point, they've got those 2 young running backs are excellent. And their offensive line, while not great, they've got some big hosses in there, man. Guys that are explosive and like people moving style of offensive linemen. Very, very unique to Seattle. They always seem to find guys like that. So they can run versus light boxes and kind of move people off the spot in a way that is very unique to them. It's not always the prettiest. It's like kind of messy. Combinations aren't always clean. But gosh, they got some big hosses in there that can move people off the football. So you have to negotiate that. And that's one of the problems about playing an offense with explosive pieces is you got, well, I think we listed off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like 6 people that are explosive playmakers. How do we allocate resources to cover these guys? And that's not even getting to like some of the technical stuff they do. Like from a keeper standpoint, like those things put defensive ends in blenders. They make it hard for the linebackers. And you've got fast guys running to spots. It's going to be a challenge this week. But I think if I'm Jack, I would err towards being a little bit more conservative, keep everything in front of you, tell Percy to get back. Don't let that post over the top get you this week. We can't miss it the first time like we did against Atlanta. We can't miss it like we did against New England. Let's get back in coverage there and be smart and play a conservative brand of football. And I know that's not the sexiest thing of all time, but I want Seattle to show me that Geno Smith can go the length of the field on an 11-play drive and not turn the football over and not go 3 and out. So yeah. I think that's what I would do.
I mean, the other alternative is kind of swinging all the way the other way. And maybe they'll probably do a little bit of both. I would say probably lean more towards what you just said, right? But if you blitz him hard, you get the ball out quickly because he's got to get the ball out quickly. You obviously risk then the catch and run explosive play. But can you make Geno make decisions quicker than he wants to, and will he throw you one? Like I do think in select situations point. You should probably do some of that. And then I think the pass rush is going to be an interesting thing this week too. They do a lot with motion, and they try to give Geno a lot of answers before the test, which means before you take the test, and that means you got a lot of shifting fronts and different things. But you mentioned the keeper game, the discipline becomes really important. But they do all this stuff that you have to be aware of, and we talked earlier with the Commanders' offensive line. Like one of the things they've done to help them is doing a lot more stuff to break the rhythm of the pass rush, and I think Seattle does a good job of that. Yeah. And so last week is throw it out. Everyone's like, now they traded the 2 pass rushers and they don't have any pass rush. And it's like, Mac Jones gets rid of the ball. The only thing he does well is he gets rid of the ball quickly. Doesn't go to anywhere in particular often, but he does get it out of his hand. This week, Geno will hold it. He will try to make a play. Can you get home? And when you get home, can you sack fumble? Like, can you make a play? Like, this could be a huge Daron Payne type of game where he has one of those impact plays that you're like, oh, that's why we paid that guy all this money. And he's had a couple this year. He hasn't been as consistent, but he still has a knack for making the big one. So yeah, that's kind of some of the things that I'm looking for sure on that side of the ball as well.
I totally agree. I think, like I said, when you look at the Cincinnati game, for example, that they got home with the 4-man rush quite a bit. And those guys did a great job of, in critical situations, low red zone, 3rd down, of maybe they're not getting sacks, but they're getting pressures, they're getting them off the spot, they're forcing errant throws or batting passes down. And so it wasn't like a super consistent pressure, but in the big moments, they were able to get it done. And I think that's also kind of reflective of how Shane Waldron calls games. They get in these 3rd and longer situations. It's very drop back heavy. They get in 2nd and 10 in the red zone. It's drop back heavy. And I felt like Cincinnati was able to kind of key in on that rhythm and then make plays when they had to. So big game, obviously, for that defensive line. Big game for Jack too. Kind of a lot of problems to solve here. And I think the pressure thing is interesting. I like that a lot. Can you bring a little bit of 5-man pressure, zone pressures? Can you just disrupt this group that, like I said, the offensive line for them, they've got some talented people, but they're not playing really well together because there's a lot of new pieces kind of coming in and out. So can you maximize that? And I'm really, again, this is one of those things where you're curious to see how Sam does offensively in terms of managing what they do and managing the noise, and can he continue to build on last week's performance? And then it kind of comes to Jack and getting these guys ready to play a pretty good offense, pretty explosive offense. And if they can figure it out and find a good solution, I think they can win this football game, but it's going to be a big lift for sure.
Yeah, people have asked me all week, like, what do you expect? I expect them to compete.
Yeah,
we'll see what that turns into, but I do expect them to go out there and compete. And you know, I also don't know what to expect from Seattle. Like, are they wounded and like fatally flawed now after Baltimore kicked their ass, or are they angry and ready to come back and play a great game at home after getting their butts kicked and they're, you know, the bounce back is real.
You said this the other day, man. Like, Baltimore is like maybe the best team in football right now. Offensive, defense, special teams. They can run the ball. They got a good quarterback. So I think that might be an anomaly compared to what I've seen from the rest of the year. So I still think they're a good team despite that loss to Baltimore.
Right, but like how do they handle it? Like,
I get what you're saying.
You know, is there a letdown and then they're like, oh man, all right, well at least we have Washington. Like we'll just walk in there and beat them and we'll be fine. Or are they like, no, we're pissed and we're about to go destroy these dudes, and you know, that obviously is gonna have a big impact on the game as well. We'll be talking about it more on Sunday. Take Command pregame show will be live at Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor. You can truly come hang out with us the entire show because we start at 1 p.m. Come watch the games. Come hang out. Listen to us breaking down the game. Hope to see you there. Come say hi. As always, when I tell you to come say hi, please do it in a commercial break. When you talk to us when we're on the air, it doesn't really work that well. But we'd love to see you and say what's up in between us talking. And then we'll be back for the post-game show on YouTube late on Sunday night. For Logan, I'm Craig. See y'all on the radio. Until then, thanks for watching and listening to Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.